Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel where we discuss, we comment, we analyze, and we talk about all aspects of the game of chess. I'm your host. My name is Kari Lasaniziris, and in this video, we are going to show the game that I played last night at the December Swiss tournament hosted by the Queen's Chess Club, and it took place at Floral Park, New York. This is in the middle of Long Island. But before we begin, the announcement. Let's share the screen for the announcement. Here it is, the December Swiss, taking place on 5 consecutive Fridays. It started December 5th, where I lost, December 12th, where I won, and not just one, but it was my best chess success ever. I defeated a national master rated 2000. December 19th, lost again, and December 26th, snowstorm, and the round was cancelled. And January 2nd, the last round yesterday, the weather was cold. Yes, the snow had not melted, but no snowstorm, and the round took place as usual. Now, let's see who was my opponent in this last round. It doesn't matter if you call it 4 or 5. No, before my opponent, let's look at the time control. G90 D5. What does this mean? It means that when the game starts, players have 90 minutes on their clocks, 1.5 hours. And when it's a player's turn to move, for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. This is what's called the delay, the D. And then it continues going downwards from where it stopped before at the previous move. And players are expected to complete all their moves before their clock shows 0. If any players the clock shows 0, this player is timed out, and this player loses the game no matter how wonderful their position, even if they're one move away from checkmate. There is one exception if the player that is not timed out has what's called insufficient material, for example, only king or king knight or king bishop, then the game is declared a draw. My opponent, who was my opponent at the last round? The name of my opponent is Leon Lee, and his rating is 1903, 1903. Compare this with mine, 1551, 1551. And I was 352 points less than my opponent. And as if this was not enough, Leon was playing with the white pieces and I was playing with the black. But let's go to the chessboard of chess.com and see what actually happened. Leon with the white pieces starts with the perhaps most popular move, pawn to e4. This and the pawn to d4 are the most popular. I think that the pawn to e4 is a little bit more popular, but both are okay. None is better than the other. And I reply to the French defense, one of the many options of black, pawn to e6. The most popular is the Sicilian, pawn to c5 or maybe pawn to e5. There are other possibilities. You may have the knight to f6, the Alekhine defense, or the knight to c6, or you may want to start a fianchetto with pawn to g6 or even to b6. But I play the French because two reasons. One is I'm not the best, I'm mostly comfortable with that, and I stuck with that. And another is when white plays, I don't like it, or at least I didn't like to see a French against me. Next moves, the standard moves for the French, pawn to d4 for Leo and pawn to d5 for me. Not the only moves, but these are the most common moves for the French defense second move. And here, the white player in the French has many options. The knight from b1 can go c3 or d2. The pawn from e4 can go to e5, the advanced variation. Or maybe the pawn on e4 can take on d5, the exchange variation. The problem with the last is that once black takes back with a d6, this solves the problem of the bishop at c8 that otherwise is blocked. And Leon decided to... Until now, we have the French defense normal variation. You see here how they call the various openings after the various move. And Leo decided to select a third move, the knight to go to d2. This is what's called the Taras variation. The names are not so important. It's mostly Either they describe what's happening or they honor whoever thought of them first. Taras, Dr. Sigbert Taras, was one of the greatest players about 100 years ago and one of the greatest players at the beginning of the 20th century never to become a world champion. And let's see, how do I continue? I want to attack the d4 square and the d4 pawn and I move my pawn to c5. This is called now the French defense Taras Open. Why did I do it? Is because if Leon decides to take my pawn on c5, I take it back with my bishop on f8, and this gives me better control of the center. So Leon does not do it. Instead, he places his knight on f3, develops the knight on f3, and I develop my knight on c6. Just to explain about what's happening while still in the beginning, this little booklet that you see here, it means it's a book move and it says book, meaning these moves can be analyzed by theory extensively. Once you're out of the book, the computer is going to evaluate the moves from the best choice being brilliant with 2 exclamation marks, a great has 1 exclamation mark, the best has a star, the great move has a thumbs up, the good move has a checkpoint. And on the negative side, if you see a question mark with exclamation, it's inaccuracy. Worse than that is a mistake, 1 question mark, and the worst of all is the blunder with 2 question marks. But now we'll continue. And Leon, instead of directly taking on c5, is going to do something else before, and we're going to see why. He changes on d5. We completed the first 5 moves, all of them book moves, and Leon is ahead by 0.31. The computer will also give a number after every move. Positive number, as you see here, the plus 0.31 means that white is doing better. Negative means that black is doing better. For now, white starting first has a small advantage. And now move number 6. Leon will exchange to c5, and you may be wondering why now and not at the previous move. And I'll explain it. Because now my pawn on d5 is isolated, has no pawns on c and e files to help it, to protect it. That is, it can only be protected by pieces. Currently the queen. Of course, you don't like a whole queen just to protect a pawn. And also, Leon has 2 pawn islands. The one is a2, b2, c2, and the other is f2, g2, h2. Well, I have 3 of them, a7, b7, d5, and f7, g7, h7. If we reach to the ending, the fewer pawn islands you have, the better, because the pawns can help each other. For now, the isolated pawn by itself is not a big problem with other pieces on the board, but if Leon can start exchanging and reaches an ending with this pawn structure, he has an advantage. No guarantee, because the king's position is also very crucial, and the kings will not be at the e1 and e8 at that point, but the fewer pawn islands, the better. Other factors is the king position and how advanced are the pawns. Let's continue now. Until now, we had book moves, and Leo will deviate from theory, and bishop goes to e2. Computers say it's a good move. Would rather have the bishop go to d3. And now, finally, I am ahead by 0.40. I develop my knight to f6, castling kingside both sides. And now Leo will send his knight to b3. Attacking my bishop on c5. If I'm careless and I play something irrelevant, I lose my bishop, a piece down, and it's over. I cannot say it's completely over, but I can only hope for a miracle. But this did not happen. Not only that, I send my bishop to b6. And my bishop on b6 controls 3 out of the 4 squares that the knight has access. a5, c5, and d4. It does not control d2. So I'm taking a lot of the power of the white knight on b3. And Leo decides to pin my knight on f6. Bishop goes to g5. My knight on f6 is pinned. If accidentally or carelessly or for any reason I move my knight, or even if I even touch it when I have to move it, then my queen on d8 is lost. And unless I have an immediate checkmate, which I don't, it's now game is really over. And I don't like this pin. And I attack the bishop with my pawn on h6. So I'm posing Leon the question, what are you going to do? Exchange on f6? Or are you going to withdraw? Either to h4 and keep the pin, or f4, e3, d2, c1. There are many other squares, each of them with its own pluses and minuses. We completed 10 moves, and now the computer gives me the advantage, 0.56. Just from move 10. And what will Leo do? He likes a pin, bishop goes to h4. My rook goes to e8. Why? Because before, and maybe perhaps Leo could have thought of it, but he didn't do it in any case, is if he changes on f6, bishop takes on f6 and queen takes on f6, because I'm not going to take with a pawn g7. It's very dangerous to open my king. The queen takes the unprotected pawn on d5. But if this happens now after I move my rook, then I can take the bishop on e2. So I win a piece for a pawn. So indirectly, I protect my pawn on d5. He could have done it from the previous move. Let's give a look now. He could have taken the knight. If I take with the queen, he wins the pawn. But the computer does not even suggest it. The computer would rather have the bishop go to f4, and if we exchange, the computer would rather have the pawn go to c3. Maybe the queen on d5 is too exposed for the privilege of having the extra pawn. But in any case, that's what happened, and now tactically I'm protecting the pawn on d5. Next move. Pawn to c3 for Leo. Why? Better control of the d4 square. And also does not allow my knight and my bishop to go to d4, even if I'm willing to do the necessary exchanges. My queen goes to d6. And at this time, inaccuracy says the computer doesn't like it. So from 0.79, my advantage goes down to less than half, 0.35. And now I'm going to turn off the analysis, because I'm going to show the move that Leo played, and the computer thinks it is a blunder. Pawn to h3. And I want to ask the viewers to freeze your computer for a few seconds and try to think what would have been the best move of black. Why does the computer think that the pawn to h3 is a blunder? And to give you heads up, I did not see that move at that point. I did not play it. Give you a few seconds. And now I'm going to turn on the analysis again to continue discussing the game with the help of the computer analysis. You see, it's a blunder, 2 question marks, and my advantage from 0.23 goes up to 3.67. And it's a blunder because I can play, you see here what the computer suggests, pawn to g5. If I play that, I'll explain what's happening. Where can the bishop go? If it goes to g5, it's lost. If it goes to g3, the queen will take it because of the pin, because of my bishop on b6 pinning, and the pawn cannot take back. So if I play g5, I want the bishop. But there are two things that happen. First of all, I didn't see it then. I would see it later. And second is if that Leon has the option to take my G and H pawns at the cost of one piece, either the knight or the bishop. And these 2 pawns are in front of my king, so my king is unprotected. So is it worthwhile to win the piece for these 2 pawns? That is a serious question that one needs to think about before jumping and saying, wonderful, I have an extra piece, especially if you don't have computer evaluation during the game and you don't know that your advantage goes to 367 if you play g5. In any case, I did not play it. I decided to develop my bishop to f5, developing my pieces. Misses the computer, misses a chance. Instead of being up 342, I'm only 0.57. Bishop to d3 for Leo. Another blunder because I, again I have the option, but let's see. This time I cannot just play g5 because I'll win a piece there, but I'm going to lose my unprotected bishop on f5. That is why this time the pawn to g5 would not have been a good move, even if I had seen it, which still I had not seen. We change now d3 because I don't want to have to worry about my unprotected bishop. I was thinking about bishop going to g6 or h7, but g6, my pawns would be doubled after an exchange, and the pawn on d5, if we reach a point where Leo could take d5, it would be with a check, so I wouldn't have the chance to win something else like before I had a chance with the bishop on e2, let alone the bishop is not on e2 any longer. So let's play it safe and exchange on d3. And yes, these are the best moves according to the computer. Great moves is the computer. I'm not sure how great it is, as if I had anything else. I had some other options, but they were much riskier. Withdraw the bishop, then why did I bring it to f5? I'm going to draw it back and only help Leon develop his bishop to d3. Place to g6 and have perhaps double pawns and weaken my king to h7, and I don't know sure how good was that. So, but then Leo, of course, played what he was supposed to do. Bishop, excuse me, to queen to d3. And now, once more, I missed a great chance of g5. Computer says I should have played pawn to g5 and win a piece. Instead, I want to strengthen my pawn on d5, especially it is the isolated pawn. And I want to start some attacking and what I want to do is I want to get rid of this pawn. I want to move it to d4. If I do it now, it is attacked four times by the two knights, b3, f3, by the pawn on c3 and the queen on d3. And it's defended only twice by the knight, no, by three times, bishop b6, knight c6, and queen d6. So I want to do it at some point. That's why rook goes to d8. Of course, misses the computer because I didn't see this wonderful extra piece I could win by pushing the pawn to g5. And now, Leon will place his rook to d1, so the pawn might be defended three times, but it is at, maybe, I'm sorry. Now the pawn, if it moves to d4, it's defended four times, but it's also going to be attacked four times. So still, let's see what would happen. The story is what would happen if I push my pawn to d4. That's what I was thinking at the time. It would be attacked by the two knights, the pawn on c3, the queen on d3, and the rook on e1 five times. It would be defended four times. The two knights, c6, f6, the bishop b6, the queen d6, and the rook d8. And while I was thinking all these things and should I push it, what should I do? I couldn't see anything else to support the d4 square. And also, in addition to pushing the pawns, when you are dealing with isolated pawn, the crucial square is the one in front of the pawn. Both sides want to control it as many times as possible, and now white is leading 5-4. This I didn't like, but I couldn't see anything else to strengthen it. So keep it for now and hope things improve in the future. And then I was looking for other moves. Only then I started thinking about other moves. I saw it and I couldn't believe it. If I pushed my pawn to g5, the bishop on h4 is lost. As I mentioned, what can it do? It can take the pawn on g5, but then it's lost by the pawn on h6. Then the knight can take it, so white wins two pawns for a piece. Usually a piece is worth three pawns, so it's not so good, but two pawns in front of the king, exposing it. Dream come true. If you could do it without giving a piece, of course, it's wonderful. You won the game. If you could do it with at the cost of a piece, you have to see is there any mating combination or not. As I was thinking all these things, I also had another thought. If I let the game continue normally, with Leon being a higher rated player than me, he'll sooner or later take this isolated pawn. He'll go to an ending, a superior ending with at least an extra pawn, and I'm lost. If I take this gamble now, I have a chance. I have a chance, you never know. At that time, I didn't even know that without my g5, I was still ahead, or even though 0.07. I really thought I was down at least half a pawn. So move number 16. But as we like to stop after every 5 moves, let's see after move 15. I was only ahead by 0.02, as you see here. After this means, now I'm ahead by 261 if I see the pawn to g5. And after thinking, I said, let's take the chance. Let's jump. Because otherwise, as I mentioned, Leon as a greater player will take advantage that I have an isolated pawn, exchange everything, and win the pawn. His king will go to the center, win the pawn, and with an extra pawn, especially on the queen side, king side will be 3 versus 3. On the queen side is 3 versus 2. He'll make a pass pawn and win the game. And yes, even though we barely ended the opening and win the middle game, one needs to think about the end game that will emerge. You don't just play whatever and whatever happens, happens. And now really I pushed my pawn to g5 and crossed my fingers. Computer says it is a great move. And now let's see what happened. The first question clearly Leon is not going to send the bishop to g3 because the queen will take it and the pawn on f2 cannot take it back because of the pin, because my bishop is on b6. I was looking again and again and again, would it be possible for Leo to block the pin, put something in the diagonal and attack at the same time elsewhere, and then while I save my queen I lose some other piece. That perhaps could be the case. Let's assume that if Leo could place his knight on d4, he was attacking, for example, the rook or something important. Then I would be in a very difficult case because I couldn't save the rook or whatever else was attacked, because then I would lose the queen. I saw that nothing like that was going to happen, and that is why I felt more confident to place that move. And now Leo clearly is not going to place his bishop on g3 because it's really going to be lost. He doesn't have any, as they call it, Zwickenzug intermediate move to attack my bishop and also attack my queen. He doesn't have, for example, he doesn't have a pawn to place on c5. And what can he do? He minimize loss means he must take the g5 pawn. He has two chances, either to take with the knight or with the bishop. Which is better? And I have to make sure that I don't end into trouble in at least one of the two scenarios. The computer gives these two almost the same rating, prefers the knight, and that's what Leon lead. The knight goes to g5, and then of course I have only moves. I must take with the pawn. These moves happen very fast, no other choice, and he must take with his bishop. Yes, he lost a piece for 2 pawns, but what 2 pawns? The pawn in front of the king. But also what took me a little bit by surprise is he pinned my knight on f6. Which means that if I move my knight, I don't lose a queen like before, but I lose a rook. And if I take the bishop, then I ended up winning 2 pieces for rook and 2 pawns. And the rook and 2 pawns are more than 2 pieces, 7 versus 6. That's why I must make sure that the knight stays on f6 while the pin goes on. And it was not so easy. I want to protect my knight as much as possible. Queen goes to e5. There's something else now that if Leo exchanges, he wins the pawn on d5. But by now move my queen on because he's attacked twice and defended Not yet, but there could be this danger because it's isolated pawn. But I want to have my rook facing the queen and not my queen facing the queen. Queen goes to e5. And also attack the bishop, something else. I wanted to make the bishop move. If possible, destroy the pin. A bishop cannot go to a4, it will be lost. So Leon likes the fork, actually not the fork, likes the pin and sends the bishop to h4. I still have to be careful. And the queen is the only thing defending my knight. Because it's not like the pin with the queen where at least you could exchange. Now if my queen stops protecting the knight on f6, the knight is lost and I'll be down by 2 pawns. For example, I cannot send my queen to h5 to attack the bishop. Bishop takes knight, I'm 2 pawns down and 2 pawns in front of my king. So my advantage, although the computer says 2.30, is very, very delicate. Where can my queen go? Cannot go to a5, will be taken by the queen, cannot go to g7, will be taken by the bishop. I have to take care of both my queen on e5 and my knight on f6. So let's add more defense to my knights. Rook goes to e6. And also, I don't want to lose the pawn at d5. If I'm not careful, it can easily be lost. And then I lost 3 pawns for the piece, and a piece is 3 pawns. Not a good situation. 2 pawns are enough, especially 2 pawns in front of the king, not a third one. Knight goes to d2 for Leon that wants to place it near the action, maybe next to f3 and attack the queen. And now my rook goes to e8. Good thing with this is that with the knight blocks the support of the rook. So it is safer to move my rook to e8. And there is no pin any longer. And my knight f6 now is protected twice, both queen on e5 and rook on e5. So I have less to worry about. We completed the first 20 moves. How is the game going? I have an advantage of 2.35. Well, it is important. I took advantage of the blunder, although quite late. Not on my first chance, but on my third or fourth chance. On my third chance, I took it. But at least I was lucky and Leon did not correct it in the meantime. 2.35 is important, but does not yet determine the game, especially when you play so much higher rated player. It doesn't take more than one little mistake and everything changes. Everything becomes at least equal, if not advantage for Leo. 20 moves are over. Now next move for Leo is going to attack my queen. Knight goes to f3. Fortunately, I can move my queen anywhere I like because the rook protects a knight. I send my queen to e4. I want to exchange queens. Why? Because the 2 pawns in front of the king that I lost will be less significant without queens. Because the chance of suddenly a mating combination coming out of nowhere is much, much smaller. It doesn't completely vanish, but without queens, it's so much smaller. And Leo knows it and sends the queen to d2 to avoid the exchange. And my queen now goes to f5. And Leon realizes that he can win the pawn on d5, especially without my rook being on d8, and he decides to go for it and win a third pawn for the piece. And here is how it goes. He takes here on f6. Bishop takes on f6. Since there is no pin, there is no advantage for him to have his bishop on h4 attacking the knight on f6. The bishop, in fact, is very little control there. That's why he exchanged with my knight that had a powerful position independently of this attack. My knight on f6 had, I wouldn't say the best. Of course, the best on the knight is fifth, or, meaning for black it is fourth or third rank. But even there, it was much stronger than the bishop on h4. How can I take it back? Two chances, with my rook on e6 or the queen on f5. I decided, in any case, I'm going to lose the d5 pawn, but I decided to take it with the rook. So after the Leon wins the pawn. There are no queens. Queen takes, and rook takes as expected. And now what am I going to do? I'm reaching an ending where I have an extra piece, the extra bishop on b6, but I have three less pawns. And one of them, the h3, is a passed pawn, even though it's the beginning. Was this good for me or not? I had no idea. Then the computer would give me an advantage of 2.6, but I didn't know that. And let's see. What I decided to do is let's start attacking the pawns as much as possible. Rook goes to e2 and attacks the pawn on b2. 2.55 my advantage after the first 25 moves. I was thinking rook goes to d7, my rook takes on b2, rook takes b7, then bishop to h7 goes to f2 check, and then I win Leon's rook if he decides to compete in pawn grabbing. And he decided not to do it, and instead he sends his rook on d2. He is stopping me from winning the b2 pawn. He's suggesting exchanges of rooks. In the ending, pawns become more important because they have a better chance to get promoted. So the three pawns will be more important than my bishop on b6 if I let the game go normally. What do? Let's double the rooks along the open e file. Rook goes to e6. So if Leo wants to exchange, he initiates the exchange, and then after that, I have control of the e file and I attack the pawn at b2. And Leo decides not to do it, not to exchange the rooks, because he knows that his pawns will be lost. So let's at least save one of them, send it to a4. Inaccuracy, says the computer, but it's inaccuracy if I play the correct move. That was not easy to see. And I was calculating again and again and again to make sure it works, and it did seem to work, and it's actually working, as you'll see here. And it's a top suggestion of the computer. Knight goes to e5. Computer says it is a brilliant 2 exclamation marks. What was the thought behind that? Now, if he takes my rook on e2, then it seems that he has a free rook. And if really he had a free rook, game is over. But then my knight from e5 takes on f3 with a check. Pawn takes g2, and then I win the rook. And also, I double Leon's pawns. It's a heavy weakness in front of his king. And Leon, I thought he saw it. I'm not sure if he saw it or not, or if he thought that it was a wonderful free rook for him. In any case, he takes on e2, and this is the top move of the computer. And I go according to my plan. After double check it a few times, knight takes on f3 check, pawn takes on f3, and rook takes on e2. I'm attacking the pawn at b2. We are reaching an ending where both sides have a rook, king and rook, and I have bishop 3 pawns and Leo has 6 pawns. And the question is which of them will prove to be stronger. At least the 3 pawns in the king side, the f and the h, are not connected any longer. This makes the h3 pawn much weaker. I'm attacking now the b2 pawn, and Leo wants to save it, sends it to b4 protected by c3. And my rook goes to c2 to attack the pawn on c3. We completed the first 30 moves. My advantage is 3.36, and little by little, I started feeling that I might have a chance to win the game. And just to tell you, and I forgot to tell you, but I'm going to tell you now, at move 25, after this move, now when we're going to the ending, where I had the extra bishop and Leo had the 3 extra pawns, Leo offered me a draw, which I rejected. It seemed to be even, at least for someone without computer assistance, but myself, if you want to draw, you have to stalemate me, repeat the position 3 times, move 15 moves without capture or pawn move, or is theoretically drawn move. Or really, if you have a second time repetition and it looks certain that you can have a third time, then I can save some time and agree to your draw. But other than that, I'd rather lose and learn. That is my mentality. So I did not accept a draw the same way that I had not accepted a draw offer when the game was really a draw at the 60 move 2 rounds earlier from the National Master. So here we are. Rook goes to c2, 30 moves, my advantage is 3.36, and let's see what's going to happen next. Will I be able to convert? Because myself, I was feeling I'm much better, but I knew that a small inaccuracy, for example, a skewer where I lose my rook, to give an example, because there are not too many possibilities to lose a piece, uh, because, but I had to be careful not to. I mean, there are very few pawns, so the bishop is not easy to be trapped. My bishop on b6, and Leo attacks my bishop a5, and this just temporarily delays my plans for one move. Bishop to c7 now. Rook goes to a1 now. Leo doesn't have too many things. He cannot save his pawn on c3. What can he do? If he pushes it, I still take it. If he, of course, if he places his knight on c1, his rook on c1, he loses his rook. Not much to do. He sends his rook on a1, hoping to push the a and b surviving pawns. And now I take the pawn on c3. So now I'm down 2 pawns for the bishop. In fact, I have an extra bishop and I'm 2 pawns down for that. So my advantage is even bigger. Pawn to b5. Minority attack, they call it, near the beginning or the middle of the game. It can give an advantage, create havoc on the opponent. I think by now it's a little bit too late for a minority attack. In fact, it's not even minority. 2 versus 2 pawns for any kind of attack, doesn't matter how you call it, minority, majority, or whatever. For pawn push, it's a little bit too late. My bishop is there to help. And now I'm grabbing another pawn to f3. So I have an extra bishop and I'm only 1 pawn inferior. And Leo, what he wants to do is at least get rid of these pawns. Now there is a very tricky detail that we need to emphasize, is that it's wonderful to have an extra bishop. It will be even wonderful if we have the same amount of pawns, but if we end up with he has king rook and I have king rook bishop and no pawns on the board. Theoretically, it is a drawn almost all of the cases. So I must make sure that at least 1 pawn survives. And the best way to do it is make sure at least 2 pawns survive. So he moves, and what Lee is trying to do is minimize the pawns on the board. He pushes, I take, he takes, and I take with my bishop. And we completed the first 35 moves, and my advantage is 4.28. I started feeling it. I have an extra bishop. I know that unless I blunder, I have at least a draw. But if the pawns disappear, especially if my 2 pawns b7, f7 disappear, it is a draw. And these pawns are at their starting points, too far away from promotion. And what does Leo do? He sends his rook to b1. He attacks my bishop. If my bishop moves, I lose the b7 pawn, and now I only have the f7 pawn to help me win, and that's why I'm not going to do it. Rook goes to f6. But this means that my bishop is stuck on b6. My rook can only stay on the 6th rank. This gives me a constraint. You don't like to have constraints. And I'm threatening now. My next move, if I could play again, is bishop takes on f2 check, and I win the pawn. And then after king moves, my bishop goes back. And I have an extra pawn in addition to the extra bishop. And Leo sees his thing, that's why he puts his king on g2, same story, the rook will take it. He placed it on h1. I can still take the pawn, but if I take with my rook, I lose the bishop. If I take the bishop, I lose the pawn on b7. And I want to keep pawns no matter what. That is why I realized what he was doing and what to do now. Activate the king. King goes to g7. computer would rather have the king go to f8, but it seems it's an excellent move. Pawn to f3. A trap. If I take the pawn, I lose my bishop. What Leo wants to do is taking advantage of this constraint that I have is push his pawns as much as possible. My king goes to g6. How can I activate my king? Rook goes to b5 and blocks my king. My king cannot use the fifth rank to come. What I want to do is place my king near the bishop and the pawn. So then my rook is not constrained on the sixth rank any longer. But now my king cannot go through the fifth rank. If I place my rook on 5 of course to exchange, he'll not take it, but take my bishop with a check and then win the pawn on b7. You see how near one can be to loss in the end if one is not careful. I had to redo calculations again and again in every move. So I sent my rook to f6. So my king at least could go through the sixth rank. Pawn to h5 for Leon wants to, so long as I have this constraint of my rook and my king cannot go to fifth rank, he wants to push his pawns as much as possible and hoping with a miracle one of them may promote. Miracle for him, nightmare for me, of course, if it comes. My king goes to f6. Completed 40 moves. My advantage is 4.48. It's quite important. If I don't make any big mistake, I can even afford one or two inaccuracies. I'm still winning, but I have to be extremely careful. Pawn to h5 for Leon. That's, if I'm not careful, pawn goes to h6 because the rook cannot take it. If I keep my king on the sixth rank, pawn to h6, and then I have to send my rook back to c8 and then I lose my bishop. I have to be very, very careful. That is why king goes to e7. Goes to the seventh rank so the rook can stop the pawn if it goes to h6. And now Leo sees that he cannot push his pawns any longer, at least not the h1. So he decides to activate his own king. King goes to g2. The best moves as a computer, clearly. I expected it. My king goes to d7. I want my king to go to c7 and protect the bishop and pawn. But Leo is going to stop me. Rook goes to f5, which means, yes, I can put my pawn there, but I lose one of my two pawns. I don't want to lose a pawn. I want to keep both of my pawns, to have twice the chances to promote one of them. So what can I do? King has to go back to e7. So I wasted two moves back and forth. I didn't make my position worse, but I delayed my plan by two moves. My plan is keep the two pawns. King goes on c7. And bishop now is free to leave. And the pawn also b7 is free to start advancing. Leo's plan is stop these things and see if his h-pawn somehow can be pushed from h5, 3 more squares for promotion. His pawn is 3 pawns for promotion, while mine, both of them are in the starting points. So he starts improving his position. It doesn't show in the computer evaluation, but clearly he starts feeling more confident and I start feeling more nervous. Next move. His rook goes to b5. And my rook goes to f6. Why? Because now I don't have to worry about the rook going to f5 again and threatening my pawn. And my king is free to move to c7 or c6. That's what I want. And the pawn, h5 pawn, cannot go to h6. Next move. Leon sees that he cannot push his h-pawn any longer. Let's push the f-pawn. And if I'm careless to take it, I lose my bishop. At least not with a check, but I'm not sure how I can even save the b7 pawn. My king goes to d7. Have to be very accurate all the time, especially when you have played for 2 hours. Not to mention another 2 hours driving to reach the location of the tournament. I had to be on full alert. And I really have to tell you that after the game was over, but fortunately only after it was over, I had a big headache. Yes, I was safe enough to drive. I drove without an incident, but really, after I parked my car, was feeling a very heavy headache. But at least I was happy that I won the game. Uh, and let's see how the game would go. King goes to g3. My king goes now to c6. And now I'm attacking the rook on b5. And the rook goes to b4 to protect the pawn on f4, although there's a king there. My bishop goes to c7. Now, finally, my bishop is free. It's because the pawn on b7 is protected. King goes to g4. I was thinking at the time, believe it or not, I have the option to take the pawn on f4 with and sacrifice bishop and rook for Leo's rook, and then I'm ending with 2 versus 1 pawns. But then I did the calculation. If this happened, my pawn, of course, would go to b5, pawn h6, pawn b4, pawn h7, b3, g8, b2, and I'm losing the game. Let's see. No, if the exchange is ended, he would be the last one to take. So pawn b5, h6, b4, h7, b3, h8, b. I'm not sure. I didn't see winning. I thought that we promote simultaneously. He would be half a move ahead of me. Maybe he was even more than that, and that's why I rejected the idea of winning the f pawn at the cost of my bishop. What do I do then? Let's start pushing the pawn to b5. So if I start this combination, the next move, then what's going to happen is that now really the pawns will come advance at the same time. He will be half a move ahead, one ply as they call it. He will have the chance to start checking, and it's not so safe, and it's for a draw at the very best for me. So again, I reject the idea. King goes to g5, but I had in my mind in case things could turn to be the other way around later. And now my rook is under attack. I want to threaten the pawn on f4 to accept pressure. I don't want to move my rook. What do I do? Bishop goes to d8 and protects the rook. And also, I have the option of what's called a discover check, but the only problem is that where can I send my rook to attack anything? If I could place my rook in any square, it could legally go. If I took it to f4, yes, attacks the rook at b4, but the king can take it. I cannot win any pawn, I can win nothing, but at least who knows what. At least I'm keeping my rook on f6 and bishop is on d8. Pawn to h6. And now Leo starts hoping his pawn is 2 squares away from promotion and not easy for me to stop it. How can I do it? If my rook goes, for example, d6 or e6, where else can it go and be safe? If it goes to e6, pawn to h7, e8, and then king can go there, and might have to sacrifice the rook for the pawn. And if I do so, I end up with bishop and 2 pawns for rook and 1 pawn, and things are not good at all with me. I don't think I could win it or even throw it. So what can I do? I was thinking, and finally rook went to g6 with the check. King goes to h5. Still protects the pawn because anywhere else I get a pawn immediately without a second thought. What can I do now? Two options. Either go to g8 all the way, but we completed the first 50 moves and I'm ahead by 5.76, which means that the game is mine to win if I play the best. But the pawn on h6 is too near promotion. I have to be extremely careful. Two moves came to my mind at that point. The one is send the rook to g8 and try to stop the pawn. Not easy for white to send the king to nearby because these are blocked, but who knows, if rook could take the f7 pawn, the king might be able somehow to go around to g6. The other move that came to my mind is rook goes down, g1, g2, g3, doesn't matter where. I decided g1 as far as possible, and the calculation is that the next move is check h1. Under most circumstances, if Leo could push his pawn to f5, and when I check from here, he can place his rook on h4 and block it, and then pawn goes free all the way to the end. In most problems that you'll see in similar positions, this is how white can save the game. But I was very, very lucky, I have to say, because I never planned it. Bishop on d8 controls h4. So if pawn goes to f5, let's see. Rook goes to g1, f5, check h1. If rook goes on h4, then I take it with checkmate. So what can... so here I place, first of all, my rook on g1. What can Leon do? He decided, since he's going to lose the ball, look what's happening, something else that's wonderful. If I could play again and I check from h1, the king cannot save the pawn, cannot go to g6 because of the f7 pawn, cannot go to g5 because of the d8 bishop, it can only go to g4 and the pawn is lost for good. This would not have happened had I placed my rook on g8 and then h8. What can Leo do? Let's threaten the bishop at least. Yes, we lose the pawn, but if we can win the rook, then it's true I have one extra pawn, a rook and two pawns versus rook and one, but these are not easy to win at all, these games with rooks. Victor Kosnoy once said, but there's a lot of exaggeration on that rook endings are drawn, are always drawn. Not always, but for someone that's not at the very top and can knows all the techniques, someone at my level, it would be very, very difficult to win with rook and two versus rook and one pawn, unless my opponent made a huge mistake. So that's why I'm going to save my bishop and to f6, not only save it, but threaten the rook on d4. Rook goes to e4 now. And now finally, rook goes to h1 with a check. King goes to g4, only legal move. And then I get a pawn. And at this point, Leon stopped the clocks and shook my hand and resigned. I have an advantage of 5.95. And you see here that after that, if we continued, what can he do? He's 5.95 and I have extra bishop, extra pawn. I'll start seeing how to advance my b pawn, especially, okay, the f pawns are blocking each other. My pawn on b5, yes, it's not even in the middle, but it's a passed pawn. I would use my king to support it to advance, and I have also rook and bishop to help. The f pawns, Leon would first have to win the f7 pawn and then push the f5 pawn, not easy at all. That's why he resigned at this point after a little bit more than 2.5 hours and after 54 moves. It was a great win. Not so great, of course, as beating a 2000 rated player 2 weeks ago, and also have beaten someone 1958 some time ago. But one of my best wins. And let's see now the review. What does the computer think about the game overall? Of course, the computer has no idea who is playing with what ratings. I just entered the moves from the score sheet. Leon had accuracy of 85.1, I had 89.6. And we played as if his rating was 2150 and mine was 2400. Yes, I know it is flattering. I know in reality it's way less than that. But it's not, doesn't sound bad to have the computer tell you that you played as if your rating was 2400. And moves. I had one brilliant, and it was when my knight came between the two rooks, and it seemed that Leo had an extra rook, but in reality, this led much faster to a winning endgame. Grade 3 for me, 0 for Leon. Book move, 6 of us. Best 25 for me, 20 for Leo. Excellent 16 for Leo, 11 for me. 8 good moves each of us. And in the negative categories, I had two misses when I delayed taking on g5. Only on my third chance I did it, and the three chances that he didn't see it, Leon, that his bishop was lost. Computer counts him as blunder, although it's the same blunder three times. Leo had played quite a nice game, even 2150 is not a bad rating. And Leo really is a great player. I mean, it is only that one detail with this pawn to g5 cost him the game. Other than that, he really played very well. You see, other than this blunder that was three times, he had nothing else in the negative category. And now, something else that is wonderful. My rating. You see here that the winner of the tournament was Jay Bonning, a legend in the world of chess. With 3.5 out of 4, he tied with Vladimir Polyakin. And I want to show you myself. My rating from 1551 goes up to 1631. So from uh, Class C, I'm now once again going to Class B. 1683 is the highest I ever had, but I haven't reached 1631 for a long, long time. Let's see when was rating chart or rating table. Yes, let's see when was the last time I had 1683. Does it show before the year two? No, we can go down and see. I think I had it 1642 at some point. Let's go slower. Yes, December 2019, that is 6 years and a month ago, I had 1642. So after all this time, finally, I hit the 1631. And my highest I ever had was long time ago. I reached 1683 at some point, but it was not maybe end of the month. That's why on the record you'll see 1672 from March 2019. Let's see if we can continue going ahead. And the two games I lost, by the way, I don't think I lost them by a huge margin. Mostly it's by two blunders. In one game was one blunder, the other was two bad moves. That's it about my game. I'm very happy about that. Let's give a look at the tournaments, how they are going. Grecochess, two games to go between Maxim Govorukha from the Ukraine and Barak 7 from Israel. Let's see if the underwater moonlight, how is it going? If we're near the end of the first round. How many games remain? We already started round two. You see here with round two. And let's see how things are going in round two now. Has any game been completed? Because there are 28 players, instead of being three groups of nine, there are four groups of seven. Has any game been completed? Not that I see. No game has been completed. Uh, Round two has just started. Three players from each of them goes the final round. No, wait a minute. Three times four gives 12. So they'll go This is not even the semi-final round. What's going to happen is that 12 at least players will make it the next round, and then they'll have to be divided to two groups. And because of 28 instead of 27 players advancing, this will take around an additional round. But that's it for now. I ended with a very happy note. The December Swiss tournament of the Queen's Chess Club and got another 80 rating points, having defeated two players much stronger than me. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Thanks to the viewers, subscribers, the likes, the comments. I am Harry Lasaniziris. This is Greco Chess. Goodbye.